Welcome back to another episode of the ByteTalk podcast. Today we have Lena Sesardic with us. Lena, how are you?
Great, great. I'm psyched to be here.
Yeah, that's awesome, Lena. We first met a couple of months ago over Twitter. We're just like exchanging some ideas. We jumped on a call, and now I'm extremely happy to reconnect with you, and I want to learn more about what you're doing. So, just before we start, where are you based right now?
Vancouver, Canada, so Pacific time
Oh,
zone.
Hmm.
Yeah.
that's awesome. That's great. I actually thought that you were in Europe, so that's why I feel like
No,
such
yeah.
a
I'm from
early.
I'm from Europe. I'm from Croatia, but
We
yeah. Where are
we
you
woke up
guys?
at 7:30 for no reason then.
Oh, okay, that's what it is.
Sorry for you actually, because
Oh, I'm an early bird, so like I was like, this is
okay,
great. Yeah.
perfect.
Where are you guys based? You're in California with it, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
LA for me. And
I'm actually in Portland, so not too far from Vancouver.
Nice. I love Portland. Yeah.
Yeah, super fun.
yeah, and I know you have been doing a lot of work around the product management area as a whole, right? So I want to understand, like, first, what do you do today, and how you got into this whole technology field in the first place?
Sure, yeah. I'll give a quick little summary. So, I was a product manager for about like 3 to 4 years. And the way I got into product management was I started working at my first tech company in 2017. So, I graduated with economics, so not related to tech at all. And when I graduated, I started working in operations and customer service. So, just kind of went straight from the bottom at a startup, just wanted to see how it scaled. And then I wanted to do something with data analytics actually. So I was like really set on data. And then I found this job as a business analyst at a tech company, but it was like a startup like team within a massive fintech org. So I kind of got like the startup experience again, which I love. I literally love like startups and early stage stuff. So I worked as a business analyst there for a couple months, and then I got promoted to product manager. Job didn't really change a lot because it was just, again, the startup environment, but I got to learn so much about technology. I learned how to code a little bit, which anyone would have told me I would have learned, I would not have believed. So then I worked at two companies. So first the fintech org, and then I worked at another company as an innovation, like running an innovation lab as a product manager. So that was my first taste of entrepreneurship. And so I loved it. I loved doing customer discovery. I loved like prototyping new products and working with an entrepreneur in residence. Like I didn't know anything about how you start a business. I thought the first thing you did was just incorporate, but that's wrong. So I learned the actual groundwork that you do to build a product, and build it and they won't come, essentially, is what I learned. So I caught the entrepreneurial bug, and so 6 months later at that company, when the leadership changed, I decided to just go off on my own and build a startup. I thought it'd be way easier. Obviously it's super hard, and so for the past 16 months I've just been on like a crazy roller coaster ride. Self-published a book randomly, worked on several other projects, and I finally 16 months later have landed in freelance writing for the product management niche. And I'm also actually working on productizing my monetizing my personal brand that I've grown on LinkedIn. Maybe coaching. I'm kind of still working it out, but yeah, that's essentially kind of what I've been up to for the last, I guess, 8 years.
Wow, that's
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah, that's crazy. Or not crazy, it's awesome. A little crazy, right? Like all the
Yeah,
startups and
yeah.
stuff. What is you said you hopped around from like data analyst, product management to like operations support, and it like my personal story, I hopped around that as well. And what how you were articulating it, like there, especially at bigger companies, there's going to be a lot of nuances that differentiate them, but there's a lot of similarities. Like all of them, you need to foster collaboration between teams, right? You're kind of a central person. You need to do really good analysis, whether it's with data or with user experiences or whatever. So now that you've like gone through all those roles, how do you see them now? If you were like to talk to someone who's wanting to go into one of them, how would you differentiate them or guide them to one or the other based on even their own skills?
Yeah, I think kind of the common thread, and it's always, hindsight 2020, but the common thread between everything that I did, like especially in corporate, which really set me up for this like 16-month entrepreneurial journey, was the idea that my roles were always pretty broad. So even when I was a product manager or a business analyst, I was doing a bunch of other stuff. I was doing like production support, client work, I was doing like documentation, fixing bugs in production. Like it was really varied, and especially in my first job in customer service and operations, it was way more than customer service and operations. I was essentially kind of running my own thing and doing like policy changes and stuff for the company, and really everything. And so I think the big thing for me was that breadth really helped me figure out what I'm good at, what I like doing, and set me up for the later steps. And I think the other thing that was a huge common thread as well was just having ownership or something. So to me, I really like to own something and kind of, put my name on it and, be satisfied with the quality and be able to kind of make those calls. I think I don't really work well in like a massive org where I'm just kind of this tiny part and I can't really see what I'm doing. And with that ownership comes impact as well, right? So I think the biggest thing looking back on my experience that I'm grateful for is having had that variety to really build up experience, build up, what I'm interested in. I think in terms of differences, I'd say that it's probably company culture. I think when I moved to the fintech org, I went from startup to fintech, like to startup within a fintech org. And so with that, you have kind of like the baggage of the company for better and worse. So you have the brand of the company, which is huge. But then you also have like the processes around it that are not designed for a startup. So kind of dealing with that kind of organizational pushback. Like we were kind of like the startup team that everyone hated because we had like this new product
breaking all
that
the
was
rules.
like always breaking, and we weren't following like all the the usual procedures. We had our own procedures. And then the same thing happened when I was running the innovation lab, because it was a new innovation lab. And so now, like, again, I was on the team that everyone hated because they're like, why do we need to work on new products? Like, we should just work on the flagship product. And I was like, we're trying to like help the company diversify. And so I think in a bigger org, there's maybe more pushback because I think everyone's agenda is a little bit further apart. When you're at a tiny startup, like everyone kind of just, is doing the same thing sort of. So that was kind of an interesting difference that I saw. Yeah.
Interesting. That's a really good differentiator, like big org, small org. You naturally have to you diversify in a good way, I guess, but then you also diversify your focus and your emphasis and everything. And so then trying to stay together, like in step with all the different products, all the different teams, it's just much harder than on a small scale.
Yeah, and you have all the history of the company to deal with, and some people don't like change, or some people like change but they like the old way, and so you're dealing with all this like history of we used to do it like this, or like this is why it is, or let's not forget about the legacy and stuff like that. So there's just more like I think baggage to kind of be aware of, but I think that was really important, especially as to kind of prime me into a product manager. It's like, the job of a product manager really is just to make sure all voices get into the product, right? Like good or bad, all opinions, all perspectives. And so it really kind of opened my eyes to the idea that, it's not just what you want to do. In fact, like it's never what I want to do. It's what the customer wants to do and what tech kind of agrees with. And just really kind of stepping down and being that connector and really like the glue that holds everything together, which I found pretty interesting and really useful for leadership down the line, right? Because no one wants to be ordered around. It's all about kind of influence. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you develop that kind of self-awareness? Because I feel like nowadays it's so hard to like. We hear stories about these big companies and they have like these amazing brands and amazing offices. So you hear about Google, Facebook, like the big ones, right? And I feel like lots of people are naturally interested about those. But you looked inside of you and you found that, hey, like I actually like those like small companies better. So how did you develop that sense?
Yeah, I think, it's funny. I think it's because, so when I graduated with economics, I did an economics degree. It's like, I did like some pretty hard calculus. I was like, okay, this is legitimate. But when I quit, when I not quit, when I graduated, most of my friends were either going to go into accounting, so they did like a diploma for accounting. The other ones are going into a master of economics to become an economist. And so for me, I actually didn't really have a path because I didn't want to do more education. So I had to kind of figure out my own path. And with that came kind of a longer path because I couldn't go into a role that was like super specialized, or at least I didn't want to. And I said, so I think for me, subconsciously, maybe part of it was I don't think I could have really gotten a job at a big company because it was pretty competitive, but there was something really that didn't attract me to it because I felt like if I went to a bigger company in like a very specialized role, my path would kind of just be decided for me, and I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to gamble more with my career, and it turned out pretty well because I did a bunch of different stuff, and I'm super grateful for that. But I think for me it was like I couldn't really do anything else. I think like a lot of people went and worked for Deloitte. Like I don't think I could. It would be really hard for me to get hired there. And sometimes I can get really lazy with my career. I'm kind of like, I don't want to like do these like 7 rounds of interviews. Like I'll just start at this tiny startup. And yeah, so I think it was a combination of like what I thought I could do without crazy effort. And also, I wanted to gamble, and I think doing something from the bottom up. Like I also had a goal to eventually start my own company. Haven't done it yet, but still holding on to it. And so I thought, if I start at customer service at a tiny startup from the bottom, can see the company like grow and just see how it evolves. And I did, because when I joined there, it was 8 people, and then it grew to 100 when I left 3.5 years later. So that was kind of my justification. So that's, I think it was. That was probably it. Yeah.
That's so interesting. It's funny because I know that Johnny also had a similar background where like you both like you left the university, and instead of saying, oh no, I want to like do this exact thing, and you start like from this path and you specialize like for the next 10 years, you said, okay, I'm going to try many different things. And I feel like that's such a nice approach when you leave the university, because you're going to be exposed to so many options that after you look at 10 different things, now you can say, oh, I actually like 1 and 7, and then you can take one of those, right? And that was, from, if I understand correctly, that was product management for you, right, Lena?
Yeah, I think the key really is as well in the early days when you graduate, doing roles. And Johnny, I don't know if it was the same for you, but it was like doing roles themselves that are broad. So yeah, you want to keep switching things, but the first job at a university, I think it's really beneficial if you touch different things, just so you get that experience and the exposure, right? But I'm curious to kind of hear what Johnny's experience was and what you did.
I graduated with a communications degree, so I feel like economics is a little bit more specialized than that. Like there's some careers that make sense, and there's some with communications, but communications so general. Like I guess you go like marketing, PR, you could go administration, like you could go a lot of different directions with that. And so even though now I'm glad I did something general like that, when I was first looking for a job after finishing, it was very daunting because I was like, how do I position this to any company to say like I can offer these skills, Even though I knew I had some and I knew I could bring value, I knew I didn't have a tangible way to show it yet, and a general degree didn't help, So when I worked at LifeRay right after, it's a fairly small, like less than 1,000 employees at the time. But still, it's been around for 10, 15 years. It's well established, like a global operation. So it gave me a chance to get in the door somewhere that had a little bit lower threshold than like going to a big tech company that have probably a lot more requirements. But then I just like you, I did a lot of general roles. Like I did developer relations, I did security operations, I did product management, like front end. So it allowed me to just for a couple months, and it just kind of worked out this way, but a couple months I would kind of naturally switch on to a new project or we just had a new need. And I would start to fill in that. And from that, I could, put a couple skills in my backpack as I was going through. And then also decide what did I like, what did I not like. And I feel like now, and I feel like this is what you're mentioning, Lena, is now I can use all those like mini skills to bring value. Like I don't bring value because of a specific skill I have. I don't have. I'm not like a really good coder, or I'm really good at math, or I'm really good at like data analysis. I I'm able to bring like all these mini skills to paint a picture, right? And I'm curious if that's kind of how you feel, or if you gain specialized skills along the way and are using that.
No, I was just gonna say I feel like the best way that I've found to describe it is like I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, which
Yep.
sometimes it's tough because I think it's a good thing because you're very agile. They can just drop you anywhere and you'll just kind of figure it out. Because I think
Yep.
with being a jack of all trades, the other skill that you actually have is being able to just kind of figure it out, right? Because that's what you've been doing for so long. That's how you became a jack of all trades. But
Yep.
sometimes I do wonder, like, should I be specializing in something? But I
Mhm.
mean, I think if I had to just kind of like pick one thing that I'm particularly good at, like, I think I would maybe pick communication, which I know is also like really broad, but I think I'm a
Mhm.
people person and
Mhm.
I find it easy to connect with people. And I think that's really the main part of all my skills, and everything else, data and all that, like that's kind of, the filler kind of skills.
Yeah.
But essentially at the end of the day, yeah, like I'm a jack of all trades, and I like doing different things. I don't want to just be in my little cubicle doing my little thing. I want to have,
Mhm.
access to everything and have like influence and be able to help in multiple regions, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I at least in my experience, the flip side of being a jack of all trades is that you don't always have tangible ways to measure your own value because you're like the salt in the dough, right? You're not like no one tastes you specifically, but you're trying to enhance all the other ingredients, right? And there's been different points in my career that like I have this crisis of like what am I actually doing? Like I just do all these little things that I can't really measure, and like, do I actually bring any impact? Um, and thankfully, I think I can, and I think jack of all trades do in general, but it can be harder to measure than some of those other just like very maybe more technical or even just like uh, hard skill careers.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of, I mean, you've been in product management, and I feel like that's essentially a product manager. Like, they're kind of just running around, like, making sure everything's good and just doing a bunch of different things. And it's hard to kind of measure your individual value, but I wonder whether that's kind of a good thing, because it really forces you to focus in like a team kind of mindset, because you
Mm,
have to see, because maybe you can't measure your individual contribution, you really need to focus on like, okay, is the team moving, is the product moving? With that comes challenges as well. Like, we're really bad at protecting our time because we have to do everything to keep things moving, and we don't have like a
mm,
nice like Jira board with tasks like devs do, where it's like, oh, this is what I can't do anymore. And
mm-hmm,
it's like with product
mm-hmm,
managers, it's just like, oh, sorry, like things are on fire, you got to deal with it.
yep.
But I do love it. Yeah.
Mm,
That's so cool. I remember like reading your post about like good like bye bye corporate world, and I think it was like in the beginning of the year, and it's so hard. Like I remember like hearing stories from other friends that when they made that leap was extremely scary, and you have that situation where you feel like you have those golden handcuffs, and that's what you mentioned on that post too. So how was that process for you? Like, was it easy to do or was it hard? Like, how was how was that whole story?
It's funny because when I first did it, so it happened kind of really quickly. So the leadership was changing. My innovation team got cut. And so I was kind of like, that sucks. Like, I wanted to, we hadn't really properly even prototyped the first thing. So I kind of got discouraged with it. And so I got detached from the company, obviously. And like the new leadership, I wasn't familiar with them. The old leadership that had hired me had left. So I had a big kind of detachment to them. And I think I was so enamored with entrepreneurship and very, very naive, like extremely naive. I thought that I was literally, because you think you're great, right? You're just like, oh, I ran an innovation team. Like, I have 7 years corporate experience. Like, surely I can figure it out. Like, I'm a jack of all trades, right? And so so I left, and I remember I was leaving the company, and a bunch of people were just like, oh, like, call us like when you're a rich CEO, and I was just like, that's not gonna happen. But like, you hear that, and you're kind of just like, oh, like maybe I'm gonna be this like rich CEO. And so like I quit, and the first week was just kind of like me planning like, what the hell am I doing? And it wasn't until about, I think, a month and a half in that it really sunk in, and I felt the weight of it, because the first thing I did is I worked on this product called Hippokite. Super weird, but it's basically helps you like log your accomplishments at work so you can be more prepared for a performance review. Classic kind of like, B2C product to start as like a first time entrepreneur. And I wrote about that on Medium, but and I experienced my first failure. Like I experienced my first, I built the product. I did a beta actually. Like I kind of built in public too. I was like, okay, like I wasn't too pathetic, but at the end of the day, it was like, it doesn't really solve a need. It wasn't really kind of, I didn't know anything about marketing, positioning, like even anything. So it was just, it was a good attempt, but it definitely fell flat on its face. And I think that's when I realized, I was like, now I understand why it's so hard. And the other thing was just managing your own psychology. So when everyone tells you like, oh, startups are really hard, or being a solopreneur is really hard, but I never bothered actually asking like, what is hard? I thought it was building the product. And for me, like, I've built products. I was like, I built software. I'm fine with this, right? But later, when I was like in my like really, really low period, I talked to one of my mentors, and I was like, what did you mean by when you said it's hard? Like, I just want to know exactly what you're referring to. And he was like, it's the psychology. It's just the constant like roller coaster. Like you're on a high, and then the next day you're literally so low, and you don't know how to pick yourself back up, and you literally just have to keep picking yourself back up. Like that's literally entrepreneurship. You're just failing, getting back up, failing, but like it's so taxing. And COVID hit, so I'm an extremely social person, so that pretty much like killed my psyche. So I think it was a month and a half in that it hit me, because I'd kind of worn off that naiveness. Like I'd worn off the after effect of like, oh, I quit my job, this is so cool. And then it really hits you, right? And so, that was kind of the tough period. And it was super rough. And I think it was rough for probably like 8 to 10 months after it. After that, I started getting a little better. I was like, okay, I'm not that bad. But it was like a good 6 months of just, feeling like a complete failure, and just really questioning like, should I have left? And I remember I started applying for jobs actually in May, like 3 months after I left, because I was just like, maybe I should just go back to a job. Maybe I'm not made for this, right? But I ended up just not going for the jobs, and I was like, you know what, I need to keep going, because I kind of slowly got more confidence. But it was probably, I think, one of like the hardest things I've ever gone through. It's rough. Nothing will prepare you for it.
Wow. Yeah, it is. Because you felt unprepared. Do you feel like that was just a necessary, like you kind of have to just go through the mud in order to overcome that? Or do you think there's, like, looking back, are there things you could have done to be better prepared that you can think of?
I think it depends on the person. So for me, my personality type is very just throw yourself in there, deal with it, get it over with. I don't like to prepare too much. I don't like to plan. I like to just, I'm kind of like a sensation seeker, so it gets me into a lot of trouble. But I think because of that was the best thing for me to do. And honestly, it was literally the best thing I ever did for myself, my career, my relationship, everything, just going on this journey. I like actually, you actually learn who you are. Like you think you know who you are, but until this is at least my opinion, until you do entrepreneurship or something crazy like this, you don't really truly learn yourself. I think that was my experience. The other thing was I was really lucky that I had a financial runway. Like, I basically burnt myself out in the corporate world and worked like crazy and like made cash from like overtime. Wouldn't recommend doing it. Definitely got myself into a bad place mentally, but I had a runway. My husband makes good money, so I could actually just quit my job and not do anything. Like, I had a year runway, so that's kind of an important thing to state to people. But the other piece was, I knew that if I tried to do something on the side of a job, I wouldn't do it because it's so hard to find the time because, you know, you get distracted. And also when you're in the corporate mindset, the idea of going to your job and then later working on something is really backwards. Like, once you experience that, like right now, if I did a job, like I freelance, right? And then on the side, I have full on projects, right? But when, at least for me, when I was in the corporate world, that wasn't easy to do, and I didn't think I would be able to. And the other piece was, I was so green that I literally needed all the time. Like, I needed like 2 weeks to build my landing page. I needed like a week to figure out how I was gonna tweet, and just I was so slow that I needed that time and that headspace to be able to like experiment. It was like, okay, I'm doing a landing page, like, what tool do I use? Like, how do I write a landing page? Like, where do I do my images? Like, how do I do a custom domain? Like, that took me like 3 days. Like, I'm comfortable with code, but like technical stuff still trips me up. So I think those two reasons were the reasons why I think I had to just take the plunge and just kind of suffer. And it teaches you a lot, right? Because like those low periods, it makes the victory that much sweeter. Like, I'm definitely more knowledgeable now. Like, I actually understand like basic marketing and stuff. So it's just so much more satisfying. Like, when you look back and you're just like, oh God, like that landing page was so awful. But you're like, now they're awesome. And it's like, it makes it that much sweeter, I think.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because if you think that, okay, I have to do all these things and learn all these knowledges in order to take that step, you're never going to do it. So I feel like you always need some sort of naivete in order to be an entrepreneur. There's no way around it. Like, you have to you have to be really naive. Like, let's say you want to build like a fintech product, you know, like there's so many challenges around like data security, compliance, just like how you're going to connect to banks from all over the world. So, like, there's so many different systems, many legacy things. But you have to be naive to feel like, no, I can take on this really big problem. And then, like, some people, obviously, like, they figure it out, like, and they ended up doing. But even if it doesn't work out, you still learn from it. So it's almost like there's no way around it. And it's better to take that step than to just like postpone forever. And you don't have that experience. And now you know yourself so much better because of this. I feel like that's the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate prize, knowing yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the naivete is like literally what moves you forward. I think you have to kind of just have some, you know, pretty stupid beliefs to keep going. I mean, looking at, like, for example, I'm still blown away by the Stripe story, like the two brothers. It's like, you know, they were like, what, like, was one of them even like 18 yet? I'm pretty sure he was like way younger, but they're like, oh, we're just going to take PayPal over with like a couple lines of code. It's like, you have to be crazy and like naive to even think that you can do that. But I think that's what, because if you knew the weight, like if someone told me, hey, this is what you're going to have to deal with the next year, I wouldn't make the jump. And I've talked to entrepreneurs, you know, like retired entrepreneurs that are literally like, if someone told me what I would go through to build this company, I would not do it. Like, I would literally rather die. Like, it would be insane for me to consent to this, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just so overwhelming, right? I think, and the other kind of piece that has been really interesting for me is like, so basically up until 2 months ago, I was like, you know, my do or die was build a startup, like a SaaS startup. Like, it has to be a software product. I have to be a founder. Like, I need that title to survive and validate myself. And for literally almost like 14 months, I was just like, this is the goal and I'm a failure if I don't do it. But I think what I realized through the journey, and this is what you kind of realize by doing, is I actually don't really care so much about starting a SaaS startup, because I think once maybe I will eventually, like, I love software, but I think when I first started, I was so blind to how much you can do to build a business for yourself. I thought it was just like software product or nothing. And then I started listening to people who have built like money off of, like a Shopify store, or they have like a drop shipping business, or they have like, they do live events, they do coaching. It's like, I had no idea that, or I just kind of forgot that you can do something other than software, and there's things that are better suited to you. So for me, I'm kind of right now exploring potentially some sort of like a coaching offer, because I love one-on-one relationships and kind of, growing people and stuff like that. So I think through the journey, you actually find your niche, or like your category and type of product or service that you're most suited for. And until you try different things, like I literally did probably like 8 projects, and finally now 16 months later, I'm like, okay, this is kind of what I want to do. So it takes a really long time and a lot of exposure and a lot of failure to kind of find the thing that really is your calling, at least for now, right?
And what did you find? What is that calling that you have right now?
I think for me, it's like I love building up my personal brand, especially on LinkedIn, just because I get to kind of share my knowledge and help people, and just kind of, again, it's impact, right? It's like, okay, I do a post, hey, I did this in this way, this is how I'm measuring this, and then someone gets value from it, they implement it. Like, that makes me really happy. So something to do with sharing knowledge, content creation. I love writing. That's kind of the other thing actually that I unexpectedly discovered on this journey, was like, I actually love writing, and I want to actually, monetize my writing. I want to use my writing to influence people. And the last piece was like the one-on-one kind of, I'm really good with one-on-one relationships, and just, working with people on that individual basis. And so instead of right now running like a SaaS company, I think I'd prefer to kind of work with people one-on-one and see how much I can scale that, and maybe like productize it in a more scalable way down the line. So yeah, just kind of, figuring out what you're truly good at, and what feels like fun and not work, I think is the goal. And I never believed that. I was like, you can never really do stuff that just purely doesn't feel like work. But I mean, talk to me again in 2 months. But right now, honestly, everything that I'm doing doesn't really feel like I love doing it. So I think that's the ultimate kind of discovery that's happened.
Yeah, and LinkedIn is so underrated, right? I feel like every time, like, I don't interact as much with like my feed, but whenever I write something, there's always like a big impact. Sometimes there's much more engagement than Twitter or other places. So have you found anything special about LinkedIn? Because I feel like it's perceived as this spammy place with lots of HR people bugging you all the time. So like what are some of the tricks that you found in order to get people's attention there?
Yeah, I'm a massive LinkedIn girl. Like, I love LinkedIn. I'm like, not gonna lie, totally addicted to it. I tried Twitter. I see the value. I don't know that it really fits me. I don't know, maybe I talk too much and I can't do stuff in like 280 characters, but I just find the engagement on Twitter so unforgiving. It's just like, you write this massive thread for 45 minutes and then it just like dies with 3 likes, and you're just like, really? Like, I poured my heart into this. So I found Twitter really rough. But I find with LinkedIn, I think it's a couple things. The first thing is it's a little longer form, so I feel like I can actually deliver a message. The problem with threads is it's not just the content, it's the format and how it flows, and so that adds another layer of complexity. But with LinkedIn, it's just they actually just increased the limit for posts to 3,000 words, not sure, 3,000 characters, not sure I agree with that, but anyway, you have more than 280 characters, so you can kind of really deliver a message. I think the other thing as well is the profile is just more rich. Like, you can actually add stuff to it. So when you see someone's profile, you get a full picture of who they are. You can link to a lot of different stuff, their posts, and I think it's just easier to kind of get a feeling for someone. And then in terms of the feed, I mean, I'm actually curating my feed right now. I try not to live in the feed. What I do is I just save, like, I kind of have like my top, I'm supposed to be putting together like a top 50 influencer list, kind of like the people that I like consuming content from. And so I use this tool called Swipely. It's actually this guy, Jay Denani. He's actually on Twitter too, but he's mainly on LinkedIn. He just built this content creator tool that basically you can bookmark any content from the internet and create a swipe file for yourself. And so what he suggested is create a board with links to all the people whose content you love, like especially their kind of feed, their post activity. And so I just kind of click through and like go to individual people and see. It's a little annoying, but sometimes I'll spend time in the feed. But I don't know. I found so much success with LinkedIn. I just feel like, you know, the engagement is really good for me. I already had a LinkedIn network to start. I think I had about like 700 connections when I started posting on LinkedIn about a year ago. And yeah, I mean, there's a million tricks. Like I could literally talk about LinkedIn for like 3 days, but yeah, I've definitely found a lot of success with it. I think, yeah, the longer form thing, I think at the end of the day is what works. And people are there for a professional reason. I think that's the other thing that obviously differentiates it from like Instagram or TikTok or what have you. But it's, you know, it's a professional setting. I think that creates a little bit of safety too. People generally are, you know, on their best behavior a little bit more, and you know, they have like their employment history. There's a little bit of security there. Like you can't act like a total, you know, freak if you're on there, because someone will be like, oh, they work there, their employer will see them. So I think I like that. And yeah.
That's awesome. And
what are you guys on?
I love Twitter. I'm a big fan of Twitter.
You're a Twitter guy. Yeah.
but I like to diversify. I'll say this. Like I love how like Instagram allows you to do stories and how LinkedIn allows you to do more like long form content. So I think it's cool. What about you, Johnny?
Yeah, I did like a 2-year break from social media. So I'm just now actually starting to like I'm on Twitter a little bit more, partially because of the podcast. So I'm trying to like just participate and have a little bit more of like a presence there. But I definitely I resonate with LinkedIn the most. It just feels it feels like easy or easier to just kind of like share things, I guess, because I normally would share things generally around like career or mental health related to career or like just inspiration or like those kind of things. So LinkedIn, it just seems to fit that like that audience and the form and everything. It feels more focused, I guess. The other ones, I feel like I have to weed through so much more to find that niche than with LinkedIn. But I feel like I feel very foreign though. After taking a break, I'm like, oh man, you can do this now, or like, wow, that's a cool feature. Like, and I'm having to ask my wife, you know, how to do things. Like, I feel very old, and I'm pretty young.
That's like when I logged into Facebook the other day after barely using it for like 5 years or something, and I was like, what the hell? So I was telling my husband, and then he logged in and he's like, oh my god, what happened? I was like, I know, it's like a whole thing now. And he's like, this is too much, like I'm off Facebook again. And I was like, okay.
And I want to hear too about your like story like writing this book, because writing a book is definitely not easy. And you took the hardest path possible, which is self-publishing, right? You could have gone with a book publisher, but you decided to do by yourself. So how was it? Like, how was that whole process?
Yeah, so the reason I self-published was primarily, actually, I read the book Authority by Nathan Barry, the founder of ConvertKit, and it's a great book on self-publishing. I think it's a great book. I do think the part about like you don't need to have an audience, like I think that's definitely I don't agree with that. Like you do need to have an audience, and I think that was the biggest obstacle for me. But the reason I self-published was I honestly did it as a personal project, like a passion project. It wasn't supposed to be a book. I was just going to write an article about how a couple people broke into product management, because I had a lot of people always ask me, how did you break in? How did this person break in? How do I do it? And I was like, okay, I need to just, you know, get a couple stories so that you guys get more value instead of just one person, right? So I started interviewing people like all over the world, and the stories were just every single story was so different and so crazy, and there was so many detours and all that stuff that I kind of thought, you know, this is a great chance for me to actually write a book. Like I didn't plan to write it so soon, but the other thing was that was after I had my like first failure with a hippokite. So ironically for me, like writing a book was kind of like returning to my comfort zone. Like my dad's a writer. He's like written several books, a few dedicated to me that I've never read. I'm the worst, but I've read 2 of his books. But so I was kind of like, okay, writing a book, like I've seen it done, I have my dad, like I'll figure it out type of thing. But mainly it was just a passion project. It was my way of kind of, I think, also leaving a concrete deliverable on my journey, because I didn't know whether I was going to return to the corporate world, and I was a little worried about the gaps in my resume. So I was like, I'll just write a book, and then that'll be, the evidence that I did something for 6 months, and a concrete deliverable, and I can kind of, add an asset to my name. So that was kind of the reason I picked self-publishing, and honestly out of laziness. I was like, I don't want to deal with a publisher, they can prevent your book from even coming out. I was like, I just want to do it on my own. And I actually took a really big shortcut with writing the book, because I based it on interviews, so I wasn't writing out of my head like you were, for example, but I wrote it based on other people's stories. So of course I had to interview them, I had to write the stories, but it was significantly easier because the material was essentially there for me. And all the people I interviewed were just absolutely amazing. They helped me like edit their stories and everything, which was so great. But yeah, overall, it was definitely a treacherous experience, because again, I think the big thing that affected me was COVID. Again, I'm just so social. The fact that I couldn't really go out and be as social, and I was in this entrepreneurial journey on my own. I didn't really have a big network back then, so I didn't feel like anyone understood what I was going through. Like, my husband was obviously with me, but he didn't really, you don't really fully get it unless you're in it, right? So like, here I am having like meltdowns, and he's just like, what's going on? I'm like, I think this is normal, it's okay. And he's like, okay, like really stressed out from it.
Hang in there.
yeah And so it was funny, because at one point I just literally, like, I'd never written that much, right? And you're writing like an entire book, and there's like 20 stories, and it's like, there were days where he really had to like cheer me on to keep writing, and it got really painful, I think, especially towards the end. But it was cool. I love that it was fully homegrown. So I only spent $150 self-publishing the book, literally, and the $150 went to an annual Grammarly subscription, because I didn't want to do monthly. I was like, I'll just get the year, whatever. So that was actually the only cost, because my husband designed the front cover of the book. He did all kind of like the publishing stuff. I did the KDP version on my own. My parents actually edited. My mother actually read every story a couple times, because she edits my dad's book. So she's like, okay, I guess I'll do yours so too. Cool. And so that happened. And then, yeah, that was pretty much it. Like, the design, the publishing, the editing, and like the interviews. And yeah, it was a lot of work, but I think it was such a cool experience. Again, you learn through it. I definitely had PTSD after it, though. Like, I couldn't write for about 6 months. I was just like, I can't. It's just, I can't look at it anymore. It's like scary. But finally I'm back now, and I'm publishing again. But yeah, it helped me find my love for writing, I think, as well. So yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that format, both of you guys did. The results were different, right? Like, different formats of the book.
The interviews. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys both did a lot of interviews.
Yeah.
And I think that's so cool, because like, you obviously have a lot to contribute yourselves, but instead of just saying like, hey, this was my story, or this was my experience, or this is what I learned, or this is what I think you guys should do, if you're reading this, you're like taking this community that you have, and like not only enabling them to have a voice, and all these other amazing people that you guys know, but you're also diversifying the knowledge that you're putting out there, right? So it's not just your thoughts, it's also like this conglomeration of all these different thought leaders on this topic, which I would imagine that makes it a little bit more evergreen, just because again, it's not just, your own thought at that point in time, you're kind of bolstering it up. It's such a cool model.
Yeah, I feel like there's a way of looking into this too, whereas in the past, people would just, like, the author would have this one-to-many relationships with their audience, right? And nowadays, like, ideas are being shared by so many different people, and as an author, you don't need to necessarily rely on that same format that people used to do. So you have all that options, like so many people out there that you can just like ask things, and you would be surprised that they actually respond to you, and they are kind enough to give a little bit of their time to you. So as an author, you can think of how you can distribute your books many to many. And that's the beauty of it. Like, that's the beauty of like interviewing. You add your own touch, obviously, but you're like building on top of this foundation, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the key is like, I mean, you're amplifying multiple voices, right? And whenever you do that, like each person amplifies as well. So it's pretty awesome. Yeah.
And what was the hardest part for you, Lena, about writing this book?
I think the hardest part was probably just staying motivated and just not. I mean, I would have never given up, but just dealing with, again, it's just the low periods, right? Like,
Yeah.
there was actually a 2-week period where I literally, I think it was May. I started writing it, I started kind of like working on it in April, and then I think May, something hit me. I think it was probably the entrepreneurial journey. I didn't have a job and COVID and all that stuff. And there was like a 2-week period where I literally just couldn't write, couldn't do anything. I just sat on the couch and watched TV, like poured myself a glass of wine at like 3 p.m. Like it was a bad scene. My husband was just like, what is going on? And he was on like a coding journey. So he was just like coding all the time after work. And I just felt so crap. I was like, oh, like I'm just sitting here doing nothing. But yeah, so again, like managing psychology, that's just always what it comes down to, like getting yourself motivated, not feeling like, you know, you're writing, you know, something low quality, and just convincing yourself that you can do it, and just kind of staying on track. Because I think I set myself a deadline of publishing in September, and I was like, oh, surely by then it'll be fine. But like August came and it was really tight. It was like, you know, I was still editing like one of the main stories, like, you know, like mid-August or something. But so just kind of sticking to the schedule and dealing with the low periods and the doubt. Yeah.
That's
What
so
about
cool.
you? What was your biggest challenge with the book?
Same thing. Like there were like maybe 2 weeks or even more that I didn't write a single word, and keeping that motivation, it's so tough, so freaking hard. And there's nobody like you can rely on your partner. Like I told my wife all the time, like, oh, I'm feeling stuck, and she would try to help. And like obviously, like we can't rely on those people, but still, they don't know exactly what you're going through. And even like, and I imagine even if you talk to your dad, who is like a seasoned writer, still for him he wouldn't like really understand, because he wrote so many books already that he would feel like, oh, like he doesn't necessarily know how a beginner feels like. And that's like what we were, right? Like we never wrote a book in our lives, and we're like trying that for the first time. So it's so hard.
Again, the naivete, right? Like it gets you there.
That's right.
Exactly.
No, it's hard. Like I think, you know, everyone wants to be understood, and when you can't be understood, it's a really frustrating experience. And it's not any fault of anyone else, but it's just it can just be really lonely and isolating. And it's kind of funny because everyone's like, oh, you're writing a book, like that's so awesome, and you're just like, oh, like I don't want to think about it, like it's not awesome, dude. It sucks. So you have to be really happy about it. Like it's like, you know, like you're having a baby but you're not really ready, and everyone's just like, oh my god, you're having a baby. It's just like I'm freaking out inside. So it's hard.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Lena, one of our kind of favorite topics on the podcast is productivity. Like both Zeno and I love talking about like little hacks, or whether it's like processes or tools we're using, or like desk setups, you know, ergonomics, whatever. So we ask every guest, what is something right now like that's in front of you? It could be on your computer, it could be on your desk, whatever, that you're loving and you're feeling like more productive from.
Sure, yeah. I'll give you actually 2 that came to mind. So the first one is I've actually started tracking my time. So that came from freelance writing. So I actually have to track my time. One of my clients is not hourly, but I like to just track my time so I can calculate my hourly rate and kind of like get it up. And the other one is actually hourly, so I literally have to track it. And so I'm using Toggle Track, so TOGGL. Amazing product. I actually fell in love with that product the first time when I saw their landing page, because I don't know if you've seen the one with the cake or something. They have this like crazy, really cool like animation on the landing page, and it really kind of spoke to me. But anyways, I started using it for freelance writing, and now I'm actually using it to track like how much time I spend on my newsletter, how much time I spend writing my blog posts. That's kind of up next. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to see how much time I'm actually spending on stuff, and the other reason is I'm about to look into getting like a virtual assistant. So I want to see where am I spending my time, so I can, offload stuff and outsource and then be more productive. So that's still in the making. I have yet to track a bunch of stuff, but I think time tracking, it's super annoying, but it's honestly so worth it, because you can't do anything unless you track stuff. The other thing that has really saved me, it's not kind of computer related, but just going for walks, but specifically going for walks in two situations. The first is if I'm feeling really, really stressed, because for me, I'm very type A, so if I'm feeling very like overstressed and overwhelmed, I just want to keep going, and I just want to try and force the task to be done, which just puts me in a worse state. And then what happens is I'll just burn out, and then I'll be out for like 3 days. And so I try to force myself to go for a walk when I'm overwhelmed, just to kind of get out of that funk. The second situation is when I'm just not, like, I can't figure something out. It's usually with writing, where I just can't figure out like what angle, what intro or something like that, and just going for like a 45-minute walk, like music, okay, not podcasts, like, so I can kind of just think about it. But that's been a huge productivity hack for me, honestly, just getting that clarity. So I'd say those two things are definitely, I'm loving them. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lena. Like, this was a great conversation. I definitely want to keep in touch with you, because I want to hear like how was the experience with a virtual assistant. I'm extremely curious about that topic. And yeah, I'll definitely keep following you, tracking your work. I think you're awesome. And yeah, thanks for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the ByteTalk podcast. You can subscribe to be notified of our weekly episodes. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and share with your friends. See you next week.